Well, hello and welcome everyone to tonight's Connect and Share session. I'm Erica Carlisle. I'm one of the Ethics Committee members, and this is an initiative we're really excited to present. This is our third Connect and Share that we've put together in conjunction with the Wellness Committee and the Benji Brooks Committee. So I look forward to creating a space to have a really interesting discussion about, I think, a critical topic. Just to introduce a couple of people here right off the bat, Mindy Statter will be facilitating the Connect and Share tonight, and Ronnie Sellens and Christy Ryland will be helping to moderate the session as well. So with that, I'll turn things over to Ronnie.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see everybody's faces. Well, most of you. For those of you who haven't done this before, I'm going to go over a couple of ground rules. There are a couple of ways to participate. One is just raising your hand during Zoom. You can also feel free to enter comments into the chat. If you want to put in an anonymous comment, then just chat with me directly in the chat, and then I can read out the comment. And just do that anytime. Really, we're trying to avoid any HIPAA violations, protected patient information, hospital information, and then most importantly, to be respectful and also to reflect on the experience and share the emotions. This is kind of about how some event kind of stirs up some of these feelings in you, like some of the discontent. And then ideally, if you can, have your videos on and just please stay present. And obviously, since we're on Zoom, the same, like if you please mute your audio if you're not talking. I'm going to turn it back over to Erica and to introduce the whiteboard presentation.
Yeah, so just as a reminder and a refresher on what the concept of moral distress means, we've put together a video that we've shown before, but we'll hope to share with you again here. So I am going to load up that video.
I don't think the volume's working.
Did it start working? Oh, our practice session was so close. Give me one moment.
It worked so well 5 minutes ago.
I know.
Characterized by feelings of
There you go.
Yeah.
frustration,
Okay, let me just restart it.
anger, anxiety, as core values, with the feelings of being limited from taking ethically appropriate action. It often occurs when you know the ethically appropriate action you take, but are prevented to do so due to external restraints. For example, the ethical tension experienced when advocating the best interests of a baby, faced with the request for non-beneficial treatment. Moral distress is characterized by feelings of frustration, anger, anxiety, guilt, compromised integrity, powerlessness, and psychological disequilibrium. So why should we address moral distress? Moral distress must be recognized and acknowledged so that we can understand where these feelings originate. Moral distress can be mitigated when we have an opportunity to openly discuss our experiences and feelings. Third, moral distress has the potential to negatively impact work performance, retention, recruitment, job satisfaction, and the quality of patient care. Lastly, moral distress, when unaddressed, can result in moral residue and injury, and can generate worse psychological outcomes, such as depression. We are addressing moral distress because there is a need. Barriers to educate and intervention about moral injury are unfortunately ingrained in our surgical culture. There is the stigma and shame associated with moral distress and the surgical hierarchy. In this hierarchy, senior surgeons may be seen as impervious to other factors of their trainees and sharing their feelings or emotional reactions or seeking creating a safe zone, we generate a moral community, a group united by a shared common goal with moral implications, the well-being of our patients. The relationships within this moral community allow for vulnerability, for questioning, and tolerance for expressing concern. Moral distress can be mitigated by convening as a group and creating a safe zone to share and validate feelings. These gatherings provide the opportunity to equip participants with the vocabulary to deconstruct the case, identify the ethical principles and core values that were challenged or violated, to share coping strategies, and identify practical takeaways to diffuse conflicts in the future. I'd like to take a moment to provide a framework for the Connect and Share gatherings. The facilitator should outline the framework for the session. 1. Begin the session and set expectations. No HIPAA violations. Introduce the moderator, the person moderating the chat. Raise hands for discussion or participate through the chat, please. 2. Brief case presentation. Don't get mired down in the clinical details. 3. Reflect on the experience. 4. Share emotions. And 5. Takeaways, practical tips, communication tools, and templates to frame and conduct discussions. Connect and Share gatherings provide the tools for moral resilience, which can be fostered with compassion, self-compassion, and an environment that allows for raising ethical concerns. Negative feelings can be rechanneled into opportunities for learning and growth. We'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to gather and share. Join us as we conduct our own Connect and Share session. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker tonight. Dr. Brian Widener is a pediatric surgeon at the Struder Family Children's Hospital in Pensacola, Florida, and he responded to our request to identify a case that highlighted the moral distress that we all experience as we try to balance our commitment to an obligation to our hospital with our commitment to an obligation to those that we care about outside of the hospital and ourselves. So thank you for joining us, Brian. I'll transition the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk tonight. I this email came across, and I was it just sort of started this whole flood of things about what's been going on. I've been in Pensacola for 10 years now. I started here as the only pediatric surgeon, and I was backed up by a Charlotte group, a group out of Charlotte. That was part of the contract, was that because I knew I couldn't do it by myself. At the time I came here, it was very exciting. We're in Pensacola's in the very tip of the panhandle of Florida. So we've got really the biggest hospitals that kind of match ours is New Orleans, which is about 3 hours away, Birmingham, which is about 5 hours away to the north, and then you have Gainesville, which is about 6 hour drive. And so we serve and we actually are in a very poor part of Florida. And so it's very compelling. There's not much, to move into a place where you can make a real impact and you feel like you're gonna, every day is gonna matter, because if we're not here, some of my patients can't even get to my office. So how are they going to travel to Birmingham, Gainesville? So anyway, I was able to finally get my group up to 3, and then we had locums coverage, and then one of my partners decided to leave. And well, before that started, I'm sorry, they asked me to no longer have locums coverage if they're going to be 3 pediatric surgeons. So we said, okay. And I said, but at that time, I knew that one of my partners was leaving. I said, when the partner leaves, can we bring back the locums guys? And they said at the time, yes. And so the time comes, leaves, and then they tell me that they were no longer going to really fund the locums doctors that I've had been helping me for the last 10 years. And so what do we do? Do we, what I'd written in my statement was that, never in my career had I what I would do is at the various places, like I think most people do, you take the number of nights in a month, you divide that by the number of pediatric surgeons, and then that's how many call you take, right? And so I was, when I came here, it was really exciting as a pediatric surgeon, working, 8, 9 o'clock at night, on call a lot, in the ER, all the stuff that's exciting. And my family really suffered from that. And I didn't really realize that until much later. And my wife really kind of resents those years a little bit because she's basically a single mom. I've got 2 kids now are 13 and 14. And so I got together with my present partner, and we had to make what I think is a very difficult decision, is that how do we balance family with the call requirements of the hospital? And we just came up to say, we approached administration and said, well, we're willing to we're going to cover the hospital 27, 28 days a month, but we're only going to take 1 week in a month. They went along with it, but then now we're leaving patients uncovered, right? Or potentially uncovered, or patients that could have served here are getting sent somewhere else. But the system that I work for, I'd written in my statement that I realized that the system wouldn't really care if I ended up in divorce court or having a heart attack at the scrub sink, which I've seen, both those things I've seen happen to mentors of mine. And basically I felt like I had to choose between my family and the patients that I serve. And I came here to serve an underserved population, to give them everything I had, but that was at a great price for my family. And I decided I wasn't willing to do that. And now I'm 57, and quite honestly, staying up all night gets harder and harder every year, And so, and I just don't think it's unreasonable for us to have 1 week in a month. And so that's where we stand. In fact, starting Friday, we're not covering the hospital. And so, it brings up issues of, I've been here for 10 years, so I've got friends in the community, I've got, connections in the community. How do I balance those needs with the needs of my family, and actually just having some time with my family? My family's much happier that we made this decision. But what I wrote in my statement, it's given us guilt, angst, in the fact that we are not really we're not doing sort of what the job that I felt like we should do as pediatric surgeons. We have about 3,000 births, about 4,000 births a year. We're a level 1 trauma center for the state of Alabama. We're a pediatric trauma center for the state of Florida. We have a 72-bed NICU, and we have a very busy oncology service. And so that's, it's hard for us to just walk away from that from time to time, but we need a breather. So I can answer any questions you want. I kind of paraphrase what I wrote, but that's really where we are. It's the balancing my family needs with the needs of my career. And where I started out was, we're all surgeons. We're all going to take care of everybody. And we're just going to work, and you're dog tired, and another patient comes in. What do? Well, you just go down to the ER and see him and keep working. And that's great if you're a single person that only lives to do surgery, but it's not great if you got a family.
Thanks, Brian, for sharing this case. Thanks for your courage. Your vulnerability provides an opportunity for all of us to identify with you. You described a couple feelings, and this is the part where we want to reflect on the case, and we'd like you to share with us how you felt. You mentioned this internal struggle with angst. When you sent the blurb, you commented on feeling guilty. You want to expand on that?
Well, we I came here to serve this population. And in some ways, I feel guilty that I'm failing that population, right? Like, that I'm not available 24/7, and to do a job that I'm capable of doing. And so it's hard to, and I never thought I would ever leave a hospital uncovered. That was just not the way I was trained, and so, yeah, there's a lot of guilt in that. So there's going to be somebody that comes in Saturday night with maybe a corn in their esophagus or, a button battery, and they're going to have to get shipped out, or we're going to get called, and then maybe it's something like a button battery, we'd probably go in, but then, I promised my family I'd be home. My kids unfortunately know very well what being on call means, right? They know that dad's not that much fun. We're not going to do much. We're going to be hanging around the house. And when I'm off, they want me off, right? So I got guilt if I go in, and I got guilt if I don't go in.
Did you feel any resentment or indignation towards the hospital system for you being forced to make a choice between work and family?
Oh yeah, I was furious. Let me just tell you, I was absolutely furious in that when I came here, the idea was we were going to build something great for this part of the country. And institutions seemed to be behind it. And we were recruiting people, and really felt like I had an opportunity from the ground up to really build something special for kids in an area that is really underserved. And all of a sudden that kind of went away. And I felt a little bit betrayed by the system in that now they're saying that they don't, that they weren't going to support me in my endeavors to take care of the children of this area. The only time I really get upset at work is when I feel like somebody or the system is inhibiting my ability to take the best care I can of a child. And so, in that little video, frustration, angst, anxiety, guilt, lust, and I had all those feelings. And it really upset me in that I felt kind of, it was a real gut punch where I felt like I was, I'd given them what I felt like everything I could, including time with my family. And now they're walking away from me as far as their support.
So this is really different from just staying late or to cover a colleague for one night. And this is frankly an expectation by the hospital system to provide consistent service with no endpoint. So just by a show of hands, you can use the reaction button or just simply raise your hands for those of you that have your screen on. Is there anyone else who's been in this situation? Is there anyone who has not been in this situation? See, you're not alone.
And the hard thing is that the kind of the generation above me who I very much respect, and was kind of I trained at Duke for general surgery, and there was no time for family or friends or anything like that, right? And that's just the way it was. And you're either going to be a surgeon or you're going to be something else. And or I guess you're going to be a surgeon, you're going to be something less than that, right? And so this is very hard for me to walk away. Just to say we're not going to cover. That was a very hard decision for us to make.
Thanks, Brian. I'm Erin Perron. I'm the Benji Brooks co-chair, and was able to meet with these guys. And that brings up, we talked a little bit on one of the sessions to prepare. What you just talked about was kind of that generational differences and what we're seeing. Because certainly have seen changes, and I think we, as nobody raised their hand, we've all been in that situation where the hospital has asked more of us than we think is appropriate and fair. And one thing, and that was, of course, what we all grew up doing. That was the life. Like, I was in the 80-hour work week, but I had just started my residency and then, so it was, certainly less than currently. But I've really looked at the new generation with some hope that they're going to help us change this. Sometimes the responses I get from, trainees when I ask for, X, Y, or Z, comes a little surprising to me. I have to say, I'm surprised when somebody says, no, I can't do that. I'm, taking tonight off for X, Y, or Z. And my initial reaction, training like a little bit after you, but similarly, where you were always there, was aghast, like, what? Really? You're saying you won't do something? But then I kind of had to reflect and think, maybe we should all be a little bit more like that, right? Maybe we would all be healthier and happier if we had some guardrails up. And it's, like Mindy said, it's not like helping in the acute phase, or like you said, if it's a
Right.
button battery, of course you're going to go do that. Doesn't matter where you are. But if it's every day, every, little thing, every appendicitis, every pylori, every coin, everything that, should be helping something else, that's just abusive.
And it's funny that you use that term. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but it's, I guess we get acclimated to the abuse and don't really see it as abuse, right?
Right.
But I do know that it's almost like they learn this in administration school, that they know at the end of the day, we're coming in, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if it, and they use that against us, I mean, I think they use our dedication to our profession against us. And it's hard to get them, it's hard to get them to understand, they all say, well, we take calls as administrators too. And you're like, yeah, come on. Like, every time my phone goes off, that may be the rest of my night, right? And our OR is inefficient. And I tell people, in after hours, I can do an appendectomy in 3 hours and 20 minutes from ER to recovery room, with 20 minutes being the operative time. And the rest of that, me, I don't know what, wandering around. And that's 3 hours of my life that I never going to get back, and I accomplished nothing other than waiting and talking to family but there's that chunk of time that's just, every kid in my ER right now is at least an hour away from the operating room, right? This is the way the system works. And so we just, how much time has everybody spent sitting in some lounge when you can't go, right? You're stuck, you're held prisoner. And it raises a lot of, like, anger and they say, well, how many times do you get called in when you're on call? I'm like, that's not the issue, right? When I'm on call, the one times that I went to a movie on call, I got called out. And we were with friends, and that's the life we live, right? And I did choose that life, right? But it's not the same as an administrator who may have to pee on the phone a little bit and they're going to go to sleep. But that's what they say. I mean, I've been through these conversations.
Steve?
Well, Brian, thanks for sharing that with all of us. I think we can all kind of feel your pain, and we're there for you if letting it out helps, and I think it does. As law-abiding citizens and as good spouses and parents, I think we all have set certain boundaries in our lives that we don't think should be crossed. And I don't think that you should feel an ounce of guilt for setting certain boundaries that are, part of your core beliefs, and our families should be part of our core beliefs. So, yeah, I don't see a problem with what it is that you did. You did use the word "they" a lot, and they are the adversaries right now. Unfortunately, sometimes it does break down to that kind of adversarial situation. But if there's no coverage at your hospital and one of they has a child or a grandchild that needs urgent surgical care, what's their answer to that problem?
I appreciate your comments. They don't, administrators, they don't have an answer for that problem. I mean, that's what the situation was. And that's what I was advocating for, is for everybody's kid, right? Everybody's kid deserves the best care that the system can provide. And so there is no, that's actually what hurt me the most, is there wasn't a response to what are we going to do. Now, I have to admit that through a lot of negotiations, I did get locums coverage. They limit that locums coverage, so we're still having some weekends that go uncovered. But what's going to happen if the president's of the hospital's nephew, cousin, they're going to call me directly, right? And that's going to create even more. My wife and I are out to dinner or something, and that's, of course I'm going to go in, but my wife's not going to be happy about that. I mean, I had this like feeling early on in that, we're going to save the world. And my wife is part of the system that's helping keep me engaged at the hospital. And we're providing a service, and maybe that was just hubris, I don't know, but as pediatric surgeons, we can do a lot of things, right? Like, I cover testicular torsions when the urologist is off. I've gone in and done reductions of an intussusception on a hospitalist kid when the adult radiologist was never going to get it done. As pediatric surgeons, the great thing is we're well trained to do just about everything, right? But at the same time, people take advantage of that. But I just tell you this. So I wrote Ed Chen in Birmingham and Sean Larson in Gainesville, and let them know what was going on, and Chip Harton in Mobile. They're all very supportive of the fact. I said, you guys may get some things that I told them the whole story. You guys may get some patients you're wondering, why are you taking care of that patient? And fortunately, they were all very supportive of the idea that, yeah, we can't work 24/7.
Terry? I think you had a
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Brian, for sharing. I'm Terry Buckman. I have the honor of chairing the Wellness Committee. Bringing this to light and sharing these discussions are so important, because I feel like sometimes I'm disappointing people 200% of the time. I'm disappointing people at work. I'm disappointing my family at home. I'm not getting home to feed the dog, and it creates so much stress on yourself because it is not a defined profession as far as our hours and our commitment. And you're right, we don't want to walk away. We don't want to leave any stone unturned, but it has to be reasonable. And having conversations about what's reasonable expectation is so important, so that we can take that stress away. And I would even argue that you are serving your population by taking care of yourself, refreshing, recharging your batteries so that you can provide the best care. And the other comment is, you know, the they mentality. I don't think anybody knows that I'm still at work right now on this call. All right? No one knows. No one actually knows what we're all individually doing, because we're doing it in the forefront, we're doing it in the background, we're doing it at night. We are those kind of people that we all admire, but no one else really knows. And starting to have those conversations, I think, is incredibly important. So I really celebrate the fact that you are bringing this to light, and no one would ever look at this as any sign of, quote, weakness or a lack of commitment. If anything, I look at it as quite the opposite, and I think it should be applauded to have these conversations.
Aaron?
Yes,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was just saying, I appreciate your comments because I feel weak, right? Like there's a feeling of weakness that, you know, I was not married during my residency, and people had families that had to go take care of something and left us hanging. We generated some animosity towards them because that was just more work that we had to do. And so it's this, and I appreciate you saying that only because it made me feel extremely weak to say, I can't do that, which is, I think that the modern, you know, the people coming through don't have a problem saying that, but we were supposed to say yes to everything, right? You need me to do something, done. And so it is this, I mean, that's part of my issue, is feeling weak about. Now my choice is, do I leave and join a bigger practice? But then this place has even less coverage, right? So I have kind of come to the terms with the idea that us covering 28 days a month is better than us covering 0 days a month.
I think what's resonating with me and what you're talking about is the sense of guilt, where guilt is when you judge a behavior to be bad, but then what then morphs into shame, which is I am bad. And you're not bad in this situation. You're put in a situation that is out of your control, and you need leadership to acknowledge that to better serve the population, you just can't do it on your own, and you need assistance. I want to make one comment about what Steve said about what I've observed is some generational differences in the ease of people establishing priorities and boundaries, and highlighting the importance of families, hobbies, other things outside of work. And they're doing it without any fear of judgment. And I think that's another really important point. And there could be generational differences with that as well. I think Aaron, you were next, and then Jessica, and then Zaria.
I want to say the same thing as, you know, Terry was saying. I mean, this is, I do feel like this is an abuse of the system on a lot of us and our goodwill. I mean, we all came into this just like you did to, you know, try to save the world. We were all a lot younger when we made that decision. And then we realized, maybe with some time and experience, that certainly we can't do that all by ourselves. And, you know, I look to every other person in healthcare, and they have those guardrails, right? The nurses have unions. I mean, our residents have unions at Michigan, and you know, our PAs and all the things. Everybody has, you know, somebody helping to put up those guardrails. And I do think it's time for us to start discussing it as a group and collectively going to our administration and saying, like, these are the standards. And Kurt was saying the safety of the patients is really at, you know, at risk if we're being pushed to our limits.
Just before Jessica Kendall talks, I just want to point everybody to a link to a New York Times article from pre-COVID 2019 It's an op-ed piece in the New York Times just talking about how the business of healthcare in this country really depends on the exploitation of those providing the care, the nurses and the doctors. So it struck well then, it very much strikes a chord during COVID, and it very much strikes a chord now. So if you have a chance to read it, it's a pretty short read, but it is very relevant. So go ahead, Dr. Kendall. You're muted.
And I just want to highlight something that I think has been surfaced by a lot of this conversation. When you were training, or when I was training, the person who asked you to do something was somebody that you knew. It was the chief of surgery. It was a colleague with a sick child. It was your senior resident. And that's a bilateral discussion between two people. And that's what you built your ethic of, loyalty to fulfilling. The people with whom you are having this conversation now are people whose first loyalty is to the electronic equivalent of an adding machine. And their experience is that you'll do stuff for free, and they don't know what your limit is. And so the conversation is an unfair one, because you're treating, you view this as a moral imperative, which has cost you dearly personally. And they view this as, I have a limited amount of money to spend on programs in my hospital. And I think, that these guys are going to give it to me for free, so I'm not going to spend any more money on it. And from their standpoint, that may be a reasonable economic decision if they're running a hospital in a needy area. I think one pushback could be that if you're not on call because you wisely took your wife and you flew out of state to have dinner, so there's no way you could come back, no way. You got that page and you were in Phoenix. But the patient that had to be transferred was a baby with a congenital diaphragmatic hernia, so a facility fee worth millions of dollars just left the hospital. So not having coverage is economic stupidity for the people who should be looking at the bottom line. But that's this is a very different kind of conversation. Your fund of knowledge, your fund of energy, the work that you can dedicate that is so fulfilling to you, that validates you for children, there's not an endless supply of that. That has to be recharged. You need to have a sustainable life so that you can do the good work to which you dedicated yourself throughout the career. And it would be wrong of you not to protect that. So, my advice would be have those dinners somewhere where they can't get you, and have a discussion with the leadership of the hospital about the potential costs of not having a pediatric surgeon, even if it's a locums they have to pay for on call. Because just one of those babies will pay for locums for more than a year.
And
Sorry?
I appreciate your comments there. So I work for Ascension, which is the largest Catholic healthcare provider, not-for-profit in the country. Well, it's Ascension. I actually am employed by the Ascension Medical Group that provides the docs for Sacred Heart and Cedar Family Children's Hospital. And so what came up here was when I said, and we are what's known in Florida as a regional perinatal critical care center, which requires 24/7 pediatric surgery coverage. And I've heard they provide that designation provides for the hospital $26 million a year. But what happens is the head of the Ascension Medical Group, he cannot be involved in hospital politics, and the hospital cannot be involved in contracting. And so they siloed up real fast on me. when I started talking about this. So the hospital can't be seen as, I don't know if this is legally true. This is what they tell me, right? The hospital cannot be seen as forcing the medical group to do anything. And so when I said like, well, what about all this money? And this is what really kicked me in the gut is he said, well, that doesn't matter. I mean, from his standpoint, he's trying to balance his books separate from what the hospital's doing. And so does that make sense? They're completely separate from, they're together under Ascension, but they're real quick to silo up in saying like, the loss of money to the hospital is not the medical group's problem. And
So-
that's where I ran.
I think this is an illusion. So they all work
yeah.
for the same person. They all roll up to the CEO, who, could buy all of us on this talk and,
Yeah.
send us on a nice vacation. So it's actually not your problem to figure this out. It's not your problem. Because someone in the system, when that congenital diaphragmatic baby goes somewhere else, I am sure they discuss this. And if they're not, then they are not earning the millions of dollars that they are being paid. And that's not your problem. What you want to do is to give sustainable, excellent pediatric surgery to the patients you care for. And that is an incredibly worthy thing to do. That's what motivates all of us. But you can't do it, and you can't do it well if you can't do it in a sustainable way. And you get to decide what that is. And
I'm sorry.
I was, just going to say, just remember who you're having the conversation with. This isn't your chief anymore that trained you. This isn't your senior resident. This isn't, your colleague in peds gastroenterology whose kid's in the emergency room with appendicitis. Those are different kinds of conversations. The people who work in offices and look at, computer printouts, they have different motivations and they'll respond to different things. And you don't owe them any dedication.
Zaria?
Hi, Zaria Morel. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, Zaria Morel in Huntsville, Alabama. I totally understand what you're going through, Brian. I'm part of a small group as well of 2 in Huntsville. We are affiliated with UAB, so we tend to send our more complicated patients there, anybody who has congenital heart disease or anything like that. However, my comment, or really was a question, was did anybody change the way they practiced during COVID, besides the usual, a lot of cases being canceled? I will tell you that my partner and I changed our call schedule totally. We changed the way we did clinic. We used to both be available all the time. Felt like we were burning the candle on both ends and we were running 2 ORs simultaneously. And we changed it. We changed it so that, there's only 2 of us, but we would provide pediatric surgery coverage, both 14 days, 28 days, whatever, half of the month, since there was just 2 of us. However, 1 weekend a month or 2 weekends a month, we would get the general surgeons to cover us, and we would be baby calls. So we would only take calls for any children under the age of 3. Pylorix, any baby in the NICU, but anybody over 3 or 4 years old, the adult, and we only had like 3 adult general surgeons that we used, and they would do the APPEs and INDs. We changed that. The other thing that we did was that we would take call for a week at a time. Both my partner and I have aging parents. His mother is 95. My father is about to be 88. He's had a stroke in the last few years. So navigating doctor visits with our parents and all those kind of things, and spending quality time with our families as well. And having that week off You know, so I would do a week on, just suck it up, be tortured for a whole week. It could be crazy busy or it could be crazy slow. But I knew that I was on call for a week straight, but the week after I would be off. And I could do things for myself and spend quality time or run away for the weekend or just do a staycation and deal with all the little things that I would have to not do. So I'm just saying that that was something that kind of happened because of COVID, and we liked it so much that we kept it up. We did not go back to our old call schedule, and we protected each other that way. We also changed, we did the way we did the OR. We used to operate 5 days a week and have clinic half a day every day of the week. And we changed it. We changed it. So now we operate all day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We use our nurse practitioners to see some post-ops while we're in the OR. And then on Tuesday, Thursday, we do all day clinic. And so we kind of changed everything around initially for COVID, but then we liked the way it allowed us some time to deal with our own personal stuff. And also, since I don't know if anybody, knows me much outside of this forum here, but for me, as a surgeon, I've learned to, get up early in the morning. My eyes still open at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And so what I now do instead of, I don't know any child who's up at 6:30 for rounds. They don't like being awakened. So I go to the gym, and that's how I do my self-care. I take those first hour and a half, 2 hours in the morning. I have my, I don't care. I don't care. I care what you guys believe, but for me, I spend time with God in the morning, and then I go to the gym and I work out and I fill my cup first. And just like you were saying, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So once my cup is full and I know I've taken care of myself, then I'm in the hospital 7:15, 7:30, walk straight into the OR, walk straight into clinic. I do what I have to do, and I get a really good sleep. So it's just a suggestion, because I know it's hard when it's just a two-man group, and I'm doing it, and I've been doing it for the last 5 years, and just some tips. Hope that helps.
No, it does. I appreciate
Terrific.
that. So we had, as general surgery residents sort of get less and less pediatric surgery, I found that they're less and less comfortable with taking care of children. And so what we've encountered is that I've had we have an acute care trauma service, and for a lot of reasons we unfortunately lost the head of that service, and he was old school general surgery, whatever needed to do. And if I needed him to take a 10-year-old appy out, I mean, he was all for it, right? But unfortunately, I think that as general surgery people, I get the sense that they're not as comfortable with kids. They're not, and it's almost a concept, right? They're not comfortable with the concept of somebody less than 18, even, and to take that one step further, the urologist stopped taking. Several years ago, they didn't want to do any pediatric testicular torsions. Well, now I got this 15-year-old kid who comes in because the adult urologist doesn't want to take care of him. But if you draped out his genitals, you couldn't tell him from the 21-year-old, right? It's that concept that I butt my head up against, as far as like, what is, the fact they hear that they're under 18, it sets off these alarms. And I would never expect them to cover a neonatal testicular torsion. That's where I or my urology colleagues come in. And so I appreciate your comments. I don't have the same support I feel from, or the same comfort that the general surgeons would have in my community with taking a kid. I do have one guy who, he doesn't work for my system. He was a med student with me, and he's now back as a general surgeon, and he just loves to operate. And he asked me, he said, would you be upset if I did like a 12-year-old appy or something at the competing hospital? I'm like, absolutely not, man. If you're comfortable, go ahead, but don't feel guilty about sending it to me. But he's the only guy I know in this area that would be willing to really take care of him. And that's my problem as far as trying to figure out. I mean, I love your solution. It's just, people are afraid of kids. And the concept of physiologic age versus chronological age gets kind of thrown out the window. If they're not under 18, we can't touch them, and so I butt my head up against that quite a bit.
And I have to just interject. I feel like sometimes I appreciate the general surgeon's nervousness with taking care of children, but
Yeah,
I
right.
also don't appreciate having to operate on a 250-pound 16-year-old who's postpartum to take out her gallbladder. And they're like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? She's postpartum. I mean, like, really? So I really think that this is where we just have to have some frank conversations with them. Like, physiologically, this patient is no different than an adult.
Right.
Rona?
Hey, there we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Brian, I'm Rona Norelius, and I work in Montana, in Kalispell, Montana. I'm currently the only full-time up here. And so I think I, very kindly got asked to join this conversation as maybe another kind of underserved or rural surgeon voice. And like everyone has said, like, I so appreciate your comments. I appreciate your, what I would call as bravery coming forward. I think so many of us have experienced exactly what you're experiencing or something similar. And I think that there is a general feel, we were all trained to just suck it up. And it does feel very much like an act of weakness to say, I can't anymore. But I think I do want to point out that I don't think that this is a small practice problem, and I don't think it's a rural surgeon problem. I think that this is a much more globally prominent problem. And I have to say, like, I experienced the most of what you're describing now when I worked in a very big system. And I had a lot of partners, but we happened to have a number that quit at the same time or went out for different reasons, FMLA or whatever. And it was just, it doesn't matter. Like, you couldn't possibly take more than a 24-hour call at once. But when you're taking 8 of those in a month, all of a sudden you have no capacity for safe care, self-care, or anything like that. So, I think the more important issue is not necessarily size of practice, but as we've been talking about, it's like that administrative support of, like, do you have the administrative support to be able to provide the care that you signed up for and that you thought you were coming to do? And I don't have any magic answers for that. I'm blessed right now to work at a place where I think I feel right now like I really do have that administrative support. And yet at the same time, I think hospitals nationwide are experiencing such financial crunch that really everybody is trying to figure out, how do we do this? And I think it brings up a lot of really big systemic issues. One that maybe is really limited to smaller hospitals, but the cost of locums, especially for pediatric surgery right now, is absolutely outrageous. I don't know if you guys are aware of what the daily cost of a locums is that a hospital pays for right now. But it is the going rate that we're being quoted by these companies is like $6,500 a day that the hospital is being charged. And not all of that is going to the surgeon by any means. And so it's these middlemen everywhere in medicine that are bankrupting the system, but that are really impeding us from being able to provide the care that we want to, that we can, that we moved our families across the country to, right? And again, there's no solution for this, but the problem is the very low reimbursement that we have for pediatric care, right? So it sounds like, are working your tail off. Like, you've got this 72-bed NICU. You guys are busy. Why on earth can that not support 2 surgeons plus locums? So, you know, I think there's much larger systemic issues here that we're not going to solve. But I was going to say some of the solutions, and I love what Zaria, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, you know, just I think you have to start thinking outside of the box for these creative solutions. And not, what works at one place isn't going to work at another place necessarily. But I love that she's been able to try and, you know, find 3 general surgeons at least that will partner with her part-time, that it's not a black and white line in the sand. Here's the age cutoff 24/7. And I think that those are the things that those of us that are in smaller practices really do have to start to play with. And most recently, like, because of our financial crunch, I'm being asked to take maybe up to 20 days of call a month here, which our volumes aren't huge, so that's doable. But it's the emotional burden of call that you've already pointed
Yeah,
out, which is the
right.
really tough thing, right? And so what I've done is I'm like starting to work with my pediatric hospitalists of, hey, can you guys help me out in this time period until we get a partner or things change in the finances of the hospital of, can you maybe act as like that, you know, chief resident in-house, and the stuff that doesn't need a surgeon at bedside after hours, they are more than willing to like see the kids, admit the kids for me, and I can come in and see them in the morning. And, you know, I think that there are these sort of other creative solutions of how do you use APPs and stuff like that, which I'm sure you've thought of, but it's collectively work together and share these ideas. And I would love to see a rural surgeon almost, you know, subcommittee or something like that, where we could help each other brainstorm, how do we do this better? What's working at your place? What might work at my place? And then the last thought is I do love the idea of, as pediatric surgeons specifically, I think we need a collective voice. I think for too long, so many of us have experienced what I would say is abuse. And so I think, you know, especially with organizations like APSA sort of questioning what is our role, where do we go from here, what do we want to do as an organization, I would kind of plead to the bigger organization of like, hey, give us a collective voice so that we can answer to everybody what are the bigger questions of what is a reasonable call schedule, what is a reasonable amount of time for a surgeon to be expected to be available to the hospital and the families. And then to answer the question of like, what is the actual value of a pediatric surgeon? It's not just the surgeries we bill out. It's the trauma care we provide. It's all of that halo effect that we talk about, that we all, I think, individually try to reach so far outside of our training and make those arguments to administration when I don't have the education for that. I don't have the training for that. And we're all trying to do it individually, and make what is probably amount to really poor arguments, that if we had a national organization that could help formulate, this is what a pediatric surgeon is worth, so that we can go to the hospitals and have good data, good arguments, I think that would be really beneficial. So that's all. Sorry.
No, I appreciate your thoughts. I mean, again, you're in the sort of the same situation. Just as an aside, the first time I ever got a call from somebody from Kalispell, Montana, I think that he was upset. I thought he was saying Kalispell. You know, I was taking it as a fellow. But that's just an aside. What hurt me the most probably was this sense of loss of support from a business guy, you know, and now I have to admit, one good thing about the practice, I mean, there's a lot of great things. That's why I'm still here. That's why I've been here 10 years, right? I have 2 nurse practitioners and a PA. And so they take the first calls, mommy calls and the ER calls. And when I first got here, whereas in my former job in Macon, Georgia, I was taking all those calls. When I first got here, I was talking to my wife, I'm like, why am I in such a good mood all the time? She says, well, because you're sleeping at night, you know. And so they have provided me with some support. I'm not completely unsupported, and I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me, right? But at the same time, and they've maintained that mid-level coverage. but like you said, we are expected to, when we don't have a peds radiologist on call, we get called to look at x-rays. And we're trained in a lot of ways to do a lot of things, which I love that attitude. That concept at times that we are the last of the true general surgeons, right? But that kind of comes back to bite us when they take advantage of the fact that we're probably the best trained doctors in the hospital.
Steve?
Well, I think the facilitators of this session really should be commended for creating such a safe space for Brian and others to share their emotions over what's not unique to any one place or any one system. I think the emotional arguments, though, are going to be frustrating, and that Dr. Kandel's approach is really the only way to make any headway with folks who have a different motivation and a different agenda. And, others have commented that we are worth a fair amount of money and a fair amount of community support and a fair amount of doing the right thing. But the money part is the language that's best understood. And if you can find partners in the financial sphere of your healthcare system who can, quantify that for you, I bet that will be, the strongest sense of convincing folks what your message is. I don't know, give it a try. See if there are some partners out there who can really help monetize your worth to them, or the equivalent of your worth.
I'd like to
Does
share.
anybody ever remember? Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Well, I was just saying that there was a figure that was thrown around maybe 10, 15 years ago, that if a pediatric surgeon kept 7 neonates from being transferred out, that would pay for their salary for the whole year. Does anybody remember that data or have any recollection of that comment? Because if I've got a 25-weeker and they don't have to go out, they're going to be in my NICU for what, 10, 15 more weeks with the hospital billing for that. But I don't know. I was just wondering if anybody remember any kind of figure like that. Like that used to get batted around sometime. I don't know if we just made that up or it was a real.
Brian, I think that may have derived from a paper that Charlie Stoller wrote maybe 12 years ago, where he was able to squidgle some of the facility fees out of a set of institutions. Those sorts of numbers are now heavily guarded, so it's very hard to get them. But you can sometimes look at there's sometimes an analysis, in the annual report from an institution that shows you what the margins are in different parts of the hospital. And it's not infrequent that the NICU is about 20% of the bottom line of a, medium-sized community hospital. At my institution, which is on the south side of Chicago, so gets, basically all the kids are Medicaid, and Illinois is the 47th worst Medicaid payer in the US. So it's the NICU is the second largest margin for any program in the hospital. Oddly enough, the first is trauma, but it is way, way up in the positive margin map. And so they have to have pediatric surgeons. We're kind of like a utility. not to be romantic about it, but you know, it's like
Yeah.
electricity or water. You want to have a hospital, you got to have electricity or water. You want to have a NICU, you want those margins, you got to have pediatric general surgeons. And, you know, someone who can add and subtract will ultimately figure that out. But for you, I think it would be really important to understand what you need to have a sustainable life. And, you know, not allow somebody to pull you by your conscience to make money for them. That's not fair.
Right. Yeah,
The-
thank you.
The hour is getting late. This has been a really terrific discussion. And as part of the takeaway, I hope everybody looked at the chat and saw the links to references. And when the YouTube video goes out, those links will be there with other reference material. And Kurt Heiss, when we were preparing for this, brought up a really important point in terms of how can we avoid this situation that it's not just Brian, but so many people experience. And it's not just the rural surgeon, it happens in every context of providing pediatric surgery services. And he made a really constructive suggestion. And when you sit down with leadership, you want to let them know that you want to take the job, you want to care for patients safely, and how is leadership going to help you achieve that goal? And I think it's a really important, I think we're realizing now that the majority of us have taken a job and realized this is not what we signed up for. And there's a distortion of expectations. And I think it's our job as senior surgeons to help prepare fellows for when they go out and look at jobs. It's not just the money. It's setting the boundaries and being empowered to say, how can I safely take care of patients and take care of myself as well? In closing, I just want to open up to the Wellness Committee and representatives from the Wellness Committee and the Benji Brooks Committee to see if they have any closing comments. Bernie?
No, I think that was great, Minnie. And I'd say, like, as you mentioned, I feel like this happens at a group that's huge too. And I think for anybody, they should feel empowered if they don't like the situation to try to change it. And it's okay to, you know, put your family first.
And I think one of the things just to echo that in the chat is that, you know, Patrick Javits said it pretty well, like the hospital is not gonna, the institution's not gonna love you back. You know, you're only one wife, husband, brother, sister, parent, but you're one of, I mean, a small group, but still more than just one pediatric surgeon in the United States and around your area. So, and then we don't have time to read through all the comments in the chat, but essentially, you know, I think that a lot of it is very supportive, offering up some of the solutions, and also just from, I mean, Jessica Candela is on the call. I think from a Board of Governors standpoint, as these issues come up in our Connect and Share, there are direct lines, main lines straight into APSA. And I think that, you know, to come up with a set of sort of guidelines for hospitals that want pediatric surgical care, I think it's very relevant not just to rural hospitals, but to big hospitals too, who maybe have higher volume and are still understaffed. And being asked to take 2 to 3 call and 2 to 3 calls, weekend calls a month. So I think that there is probably a safe minimum that we can probably, like, you know, agree with or put another subcommittee on. That's definitely work to be done in the future.
No, agree. And Brian, I just wanted to close by thanking you so much for sharing your story. I think clearly it resonated with us.
Thank you.
And started a conversation that shouldn't stop. So I couldn't agree more with Ronnie. I think, you know, the ideas that came up tonight were great. And you know, speaking on behalf of the Ethics Committee, I'd love to help move forward with any of them that you think we can. So I look forward to continuing this discussion, and I thank everyone for sharing their stories and their wisdom with the group. So good night.